So momentarily, I'm going to dive into discussing spirit possession in Madagascar. And of course, I asked you to watch a film for today's class and to complete a class engagement quiz based on that film. But before I do so, again, I want to remind you that actually this idea that the person, one's personhood, that is the idea of oneself, can be temporarily disconnected from one's body is actually not something that only happens in exotic, quote unquote, it's a problematic term, but I'm trying to show that mindset's problematic. These faraway cultures or other cultures. In fact, our own culture in the West, we have a similar kind of space for that possibility. And that exists within the concept of dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder. This idea wherein an individual body can house multiple personalities. I will invite you to go ahead and pause this video and watch the clip, which is, of course, a rather dramatic example of an individual living with dissociative identity disorder, as was filmed and shown on the Oprah Winfrey Show. So go ahead and pause this video and take a peek. Okay, so now that you've watched that clip, I also want to note that exorcisms, right, are something that are regularly performed in the Catholic Church globally. And in fact, Thomas Sordas, who's an anthropologist of charismatic Catholicism, has shown that the number of exorcisms being performed by the Catholic Church globally is just as high today as it was during the Inquisition. And so we see in both instances, right, of dissociative identity disorder, of Christian exorcism, more specifically Catholic exorcism, the idea that this other being that's inhabiting the body is somehow bad, is always somehow demonic, satanic. It's a problem to be cured. And this is where we turn to Madagascar for an interesting counterexample. I love talking about this because this is my area of specialty. I am a scholar of spirit possession in Madagascar. So this film, which of course is quite old at this point, but in some ways, one of the fascinating aspects of the documentary is that it's still as relevant as it always has been. Like, these practices are still very much practiced in the city of Tuliar. I encourage you to Google Tuliar to see where it is. There's different ways. This is the old French colonial way of spelling it. But as you saw in the video, this is a life history of Claret, who's a spirit medium known as Saha in Malagasy. Some terms you will need to know. Trumba are spirits of deceased members of the royal Sakalava monarchy. So all along the western coast of Madagascar, the indigenous ethnic group there is known as Sakalava. Okay. And the Sakalav people, there are different branches. I don't need to get into too much detail for this course. So there's different branches. And so there were different kings and queens and princesses in different parts of the island among the Sakalava people. And when those members of the royal family passed away, some of them returned to life in the bodies of spirit mediums. So interesting, I'm trying to give an example of this. You could imagine as if Princess Diana, for example, returned to Earth, returned to us by possessing the bodies of some women in rural England, for example. And when she appeared, she spoke like Princess Diana. She had the same, would wear Princess Diana's favorite perfume and this sort of thing. So it's the same. So it gives you just an interesting counterexample. Or not a counterexample, an example of, as if it were in England. So in Madagascar, as you saw in the video, spirit mediums lose consciousness when they're possessed by Trumba. And then this Trumba emerges. This is true historical personage. So spirit possession in Madagascar starts with signs of somatic distress. People feel sick. They might have nightmares. They might have headaches. They might, there's all sorts of things, have a leg ache or whatever. And then just like here in the West, they will typically seek out Western medical care. They'll go to a doctor, right? Because even in rural parts of Madagascar, there are clinics. But what happens if after going to the doctor, you're still not cured? Well, this is where Malagasy might turn to a diviner, right? A spirit medium. They will then seek guidance from a spirit medium. And maybe that spirit medium will tell the person, oh, you know why you're not getting cured? It's because actually you are possessed by a Trumba. And so the only way you can be cured of this Trumba is if you go through all the ritual steps to allow for that Trumba to come out, to say his or her name, to have a kind of ritual greeting, and to acknowledge that that person now, that Trumba rather, kind of owns you in a sense. So to be a spirit medium in Madagascar is not a choice. It's an issue of destiny, right? This is the term they actually use to describe it, is Vintana, which means stars or destiny. And so again, it's not something you choose. It's actually very difficult because there's all sorts of food taboos associated with being a spirit medium, as I'll talk about in just a moment. So as you saw in the video, you saw a picture of Fifuazana. All you need to know is these are Christians, Malagasy Christians. And actually, this is an indigenous form of Christianity that emerged in Madagascar. And so there's a great deal of tension between a lot of not just Malagasy, but African Christians and African traditional religions, because again, they inherited this idea from European missionaries and colonists that traditional African religions are bad or satanic or demonic, right? And so this is why some of them practice exorcisms. These Malagasy Christians, Fifuazana, will actually practice exorcisms upon their own people. And so the spirit medium, in a sense, again, as I said, people will seek spirit mediums if they're physically ill and the doctor wasn't going to seek Western medical care didn't help. But sometimes they also go to see a spirit medium just because they have psychological issues, or I should say just kind of like life circumstance issues, like maybe a dispute with their mother-in-law, or a woman is really struggling to communicate with her husband, for example. This is a good reason to seek out a spirit medium. The spirit medium can give sage advice. They can also give herbs and practice, do various spells to help that individual succeed in their goals. Again, we see here that the anthropologist is not here to decide whether this is real or fake or true or false, but rather just to understand how people understand the practice in their own terms. So I have a couple slides here of pictures from my own ethnographic fieldwork. I conduct research in Madagascar, as I mentioned before, in the coastal city of Mahajanga, located on the map here to your right. And that's obviously on the coast, that city on the coast. And Batabueni is the circle kind of in between the two circles. It's a small riverine town. And lastly, the capital of Madagascar, Antananarivo. And I do participant observation, of course, and ethnographic fieldwork when I do this. I do informal interviews as well as archival research. So again, this is building upon the film you watched for class today. Is spirit possession a religion? I think it's a good question, because in some ways, spirit possession in Madagascar is a bunch of different things. It's a healing practice. As I mentioned already, people go to seek out a spirit medium if they're ill and going to the medical doctor didn't help. It is a religious experience in the sense that there's some sort of power that is greater than humans, that can control human behavior and destiny. It's also an expression of political allegiance. This one's a little more complicated. But again, as I mentioned before, these spirits are members of the Sakalav monarchy. So remember, these are formerly reigning kings and queens of this particular ethnic group. So by being a spirit medium to one of these spirits, right, you're showing that you have an allegiance to the indigenous monarchy, right? You show some form of allegiance to this, indigenous royal family, as opposed to, say, the French, right, who later colonized Madagascar. It's a lot of fun. You can't see here, maybe you saw in some of the video, but people get together in these huge pilgrimages here. This is a photo I took during one of the pilgrimages that I attended as an anthropologist in the at the rural shrine of Betsuka. There's tons of, some of the spirits like to drink alcohol or to smoke, and they like to dance. And so it's Everyone has a great time. But my favorite aspect of spirit possession is that it's a way of telling history. Just like you might go to Colonial Williamsburg to learn something about American history, you see people who dress up and act just as people did back then. That's the same thing with spirit possession, right? Because these Trumba are speaking the way that Malagasy people spoke in the 1800s, for example, right? So if you're a little kid in that audience, a Malagasy child, you might be watching your own grandma be possessed by a Malagasy king from the 1800s. And now you're learning something about your own culture and history from the 1800s, which is pretty darn cool, if you ask me. So again, spirit possession involves pilgrimage to these shrines, right? Each spirit medium has a set of, each Trumba has a set of food taboos. They're typically associated with the way in which that Trumba passed away. So for example, if a king, a Sakalava king died chewing on a cashew, then when he reemerges in the bodies of his spirit mediums, if you are a spirit medium possessed by that Trumba spirit, it's going to be taboo for you to eat cashews, right? And when you reemerge, when you as the medium start to fall under possession, you might come out of possession going, or entering possession rather, going, right, choking on the cashew, right, for example. So again, this is, I just want to show some pictures, end with some pictures from my field work. This is on my way to the rural town of Beitsuka. I had to cross this wooden bridge to get to the town. This is obviously where you can see people bathe. There's only one body of water here, this creek. But I was also very careful and cautious when I crossed it with my camera and all my data there. So here I'm walking with a group of friends who, some of these people are spirit mediums themselves. We're all going to the shrine for a pilgrimage. These houses here, these thatch houses, are known as a Zumba. And each house corresponds to a particular Trumba spirit. Okay, so each one of these houses is for a particular Trumba spirit. And inside that house, there's typically a couple, a heterosexual couple, always a man and his wife, who are considered almost like the guardians of that home. And so when pilgrims come, like me, they welcome us into the home. They help make sure that we're taken care of. Okay. So again, spirit mediums are healers and counselors. Remember, this is a society where, particularly in rural Madagascar, there's no counselors, there's no therapists, right? So they act as a kind of therapist for the community, indigenous therapists. I spent a lot of time working with this particular spirit medium. I'm pictured here with, on your right, Rami. He's a spirit medium who's possessed by a number of mermaid spirits, which is really fascinating. And this is where he does his work and hosts people who seek his assistance or advice. Okay. All right. The very last slide that I have here is of a Famadiana. I want to give another example of an interesting ritual that occurs in Madagascar. The Famadiana is known as the turning of the bones. And unlike in the United States, where when someone has passed away, right, we bury them and that's it. Right? They're laid to rest forever, typically. But in the highlands of Madagascar, it's actually best practice to unbury the dead every few years. It depends on means, but let's say every 7 years. You'll unbury, say, your loved one, might be a grandparent, for example. You'll remove their remains, clean their remains, and put them in a fresh piece of fabric. It might be of natural silk. And so I'm going to encourage you now to go ahead. This is the last video in this unit on religion and ritual, but please go ahead and watch this final clip on the Famadiana, or the turning of the bones in Madagascar. Thanks, everyone.